To recap, in this recent UK general election, I was a count agent. I was in the room for votes being counted as part of the Count Binface party, and I had an unnervingly accurate prediction of how many votes Count Binface was going to get. Now, a viewer has sent in some analysis of my prediction, specifically this fantastic but slightly confusing wavering plot here, and they were trying to use some terrible Python code to work out, was I just lucky or am I actually a mathematical genius? So I thought I'd do another follow-up video to go through that. I've also now double-checked I'm allowed to talk about what was the most common question in the comments last time about what count agents are doing, and would you believe I've had a fourth candidate for Parliament who watches my videos, and they got in touch to answer some open questions we had, which is fantastic. And this time, it's someone who actually got elected. This video currently supported by Ground News, a news aggregator designed to avoid media bias. More on them later. Don't worry if you haven't seen the previous videos. The very short version is my official job as a count agent was to verify all the counting was being done properly and above board. The unofficial job, it turned out, what all the other count agents for the other parties were doing was trying to collect additional data to predict how well their candidate was going to do in the election. So I ran around and I looked at about 325 ballot sheets that had come in, and they're in bundles of 25. So you can kind of work out to the nearest 25 what you've seen. And of those 325, 2 of them were for Count Binface. And by scribbling on a pentagon, long story don't ask, I estimated there were 299 votes for Count Binface in the room, and there were 308. Very close. I would like to point out, in previous videos, I bring up the concept that if I was wildly off, I wouldn't be talking about it, as a subtle way to bring in that kind of selection confirmation bias. But that said, if anyone on the internet has earned the reputation of still showing results when they got them horribly wrong, I feel like it might be me. So you can rest assured, in many previous videos, my estimates or calculations or whatever I'm doing have been way off, and I've left it in the edit. If we had more time, I could probably make a supercut of all the times that's happened. I won't do that. If you got your favorite example of when I was very wrong about something, mention the video and the time code in the comments below, and maybe we'll collect them all together. But the point is, I think I would have been honest and said if I was wildly off, but I happen to be weirdly accurate. And one viewer, named Yop, has analysed exactly how lucky I was. I happened to stop counting having seen 2 votes for Count Binface out of 325, so that's what, 13 packs of 25 votes. And Yop analysed what would have happened if I had looked at a few packs more, or some packs fewer. They looked for every multiple of 25 to see how good my prediction would have been. And this is the paper that they sent in to me. What they're doing here is I saw 2 votes. And so what they're trying to work out is, now that we know what Count Binface actually got, we can calculate what is the probability, if you look at 325 votes at random, that 2 of them will have been for Binface. And this is it. There's a 27.216% chance, having looked at that many ballots, I would have seen 2 votes exactly. And they go a little bit more into the maths, and I'll link to this below if you want to check it out. They did ask ChatGTP to write some terrible Python code. I don't know how I feel about that emotionally. But what they ended up with is this plot here, which I'll just zoom in on a bit more. And so this is the number of votes you're looking at. This is the percentage error, absolute. And each one of these dots is showing if I happen to have seen the optimal number of votes out of that sample size. So it turns out, for having seen 325 ballot papers, 2 was the optimal number to see to give me the most accurate prediction, which is right down there. Now this graph shows you for every possible sample size, multiple of 25, what's the absolute best prediction I could have had. And I got lucky here on this low point. But then it goes kind of up and down. So if I happen to have seen what's this one? 475 votes. That would have given me the opportunity to have happened to have seen the right number of votes to give an incredibly accurate prediction. And then likewise up here at 325 and so on. So what Yop is showing here is there's a few places where you're both lucky enough to have seen the correct number of ballot sheets total, and on top of that, you're lucky enough to have seen the optimal number of votes for your candidate such that your prediction is weirdly accurate. And I happen to be right there at one of those minimum points. So in one sense, very lucky. But this up and down graph, I was curious, like, what on earth is causing that? So no offense to Yop, I ran my own analysis. This is the plot I ended up with. Let me talk you through it. I have split out all the possible number of votes for Count Binface that I could have seen. So for example, 325, that's the number of votes I looked at. I saw 2 for Count Binface, which is this green line up here. This is seeing 2 votes. And you can see there was a 27% chance, having looked at 325 ballots, I would have seen 2 votes for Binface. There's a 19% chance I would have seen 3. There's a 26% chance I would have seen 1. And there was only a 13% chance I would have seen none, 0. And I haven't put anything on my plot where the probability was under 10%. So there is a tiny chance I would have seen 4. So I haven't put that on here. In fact, conceivably, there's an incredibly small but non-zero chance I would have seen all 308 of the votes for Binface. So I had to draw a line somewhere. And that's what I've done. So now you can go along and see the number of votes you might have looked at. And I've gone all the way up to 1,000. And then you can look up and you'll see what's your probability of seeing a certain number of votes. And then the height above or below the 0 axis here is how far off the resulting estimate from that data would have been. And 0 is always negative 100% because you will have predicted 0 votes in total if you just naively scale that up, and you will have been negative 100% wrong because there were some votes. In this case, this is all based on Count Binface. So how do we get from this to what Yop had? Well, first of all, Yop didn't do positive or negative percentages, so I'm going to flip to the absolute error. And I've taken off 0%. I'm going to assume if you saw no votes, I personally would have just gone, I haven't got enough data to make a prediction. I wouldn't have predicted 0. So I'm going to remove 0, and you can see everything below the axis flips up to the top. Okay, now what Yop did was look at each of these and only take the bit which was the optimal prediction. So they've taken the bottom scoop of each of these, which I've removed all the tops, you get that. And if you join those up, and obviously my scaling is a bit different, you end up with the same plot that Yop had before, except what I've got here. Those percentages then show you if you had seen that many votes, what's your probability of ending up on those optimal points. So you could argue, you know, I would say what? Those 2 are good, maybe those 3 are good, these 3 are bad, those 3 are good, 3 are bad, 3 are good. Maybe it's a 50% chance that you end up in a low point of one of these, maybe less. Maybe you could say 10%. It's around there somewhere. And for each of these, look at the numbers. They're all, they get smaller as you go along, that you're optimal, but they're all, given I was only sampling around here, about a quarter. So there you are. I would estimate maybe there's a 1 in 10 chance I was that lucky. It's hard to say looking back at it in hindsight, but I would agree I was lucky. In my defense, knowingly lucky. One last thing to point out is if you go back to the original one over here, you can see as you do look at more and more votes, this is getting tighter and tighter. So the reason why I was saying here, these percentages are getting smaller, is because there's actually more options to be that close to the line, which over here, most of them are way off. So this is just showing you have to look at a significant number of cases. In this case, ballots. It could be whatever situation where you're taking a small sample and trying to scale up. The bigger your sample, the more accurate. But at some point, it's more effort than necessary for the same kind of level of confidence. So looking at this, I can see I did get lucky because we only sampled 325. That's a big spread. That's like, you know, the bulk of it is between positive and negative 50%. Not good. Whereas down here, you're getting much tighter. And that's why the other parties had count agents looking at a lot more, but not all of the ballots being counted. I would like to point out one very important assumption we are making in any kind of situation like this where we're doing a small sample to try and estimate a whole population, and you're assuming the prevalence of the thing you're estimating is evenly distributed. So my system only worked if the votes for Count Binface were evenly distributed amongst all the ballots in the room. And you might think, well, that seems reasonable, but the ballots came from different polling stations, and potentially there are different geographic regions within the constituency that have a more favorable or a less favorable view on Count Binface. And this is what the other parties were doing. I'd like to address two very common comments I've gotten on my previous video. A lot of people questioned how I showed up on election night without knowing what a count agent was meant to do, and I did. I read all the paperwork from the Electoral Commission, I did my research, but all of that pertains to your official duties and not your unofficial duties of collecting data from around the room that will help your candidate both to know what's going to happen on the night and to inform future campaigns. That is something I do now want to talk about because I spoke to a few count agents on the night about what they were doing in detail, and they said they were trying to find specific batches of ballots that came from particular polling stations because they wanted to work out which polling stations their candidate was doing well at and which stations their candidate wasn't doing well at. Or at a minimum, they wanted to have a rough level of votes percentage for their candidate for all the different possible regions so they could then align that with where they put their resources this time when they were campaigning. And I thought this was very interesting. I did double check since then that I'm allowed to talk about that because I didn't want to discuss something they're doing and get anyone in trouble, or like there's a big thing like, you're not allowed to do that, because there are a lot of regulations in place to make sure individual ballots are not identifiable. And if you've got an otherwise valid ballot, but you write your name on it, that invalidates the whole ballot. Like, they're very big on making sure the votes are anonymous. I've since done some research and I've got sign off from the people involved to say it's fine to talk about this. It's allowed to track boxes of ballots to know which polling station they came from, so you can collect that kind of nuanced local data. And it's the only way to do it. That's the only way the parties can find out, if they were putting different amounts of campaigning into different regions, how effective that was. So it is very important data collection and will have a big impact on how the parties campaign in the next election. We can now also finally answer an open question from the very first election video I did. I was showing flyers that various parties had sent out, and I was complaining about the source of data and the way they plotted their bar charts. One specific concern was a flyer that Dave Rowntree had, who was running as a Labour candidate in the Mid-Sussex area, and under the bar chart that the Lib Dems had put out, because all the parties are trying to say that they're the optimal tactical vote, so they're the one most likely to unseat the incumbent MP, so you should use your protest vote or your anti the current government vote on them. And underneath that bar chart, there was the wording, the sum of the average votes per party per ward. And at the time, I flagged it up. I didn't know what that meant. I couldn't see where the data came from, but I decided it was one distraction too many for the video I was working on. We now have the answer for what that means, because I was contacted by Evan Harris. Evan was a candidate for Parliament in the district of Oxford West and Abington, and they actually got voted into Parliament. They were an MP from 1997 through to 2010 for the Lib Dems, so an ex-MP, I guess. That's the first person who's watched my videos and got in touch who actually got voted in. So excellent. And they are super nerdy. When they were in Parliament, they were campaigning on all sorts of important science and data-driven issues. And since they've been out, they've continued to work in very similar areas. And I will say now, even though they were a Lib Dem MP, they've also worked with Labour and Green candidates to look at how they can analyse polling data. And Evan got in touch to say they know what that phrase means. To recap, the problem is, can we take the data from local council elections, which not only can have multiple people winning the same election, but they take place in much smaller local wards, and extrapolate that data to a general national election where only one person wins in a much bigger constituency?
The problem arises in many places, Mid Sussex being one, that there are multi-member wards. So you elect 2 or 3 councillors, not just one, in a ward or in some of the wards or in all of the wards. And that means that parties can put up, more than one candidate, and voters can put their X in more than one box up to the total number of councillors to be elected for that ward. Now, the question then arises, and this is a question that has to be determined when this is done by academics as well, how do you work out what the votes for each party are in each ward if one party is running 3 candidates and another's only running 1 in a ward where 3 councillors can be elected? Well, the way that the academics have done it, Professors Rawlings and Thrasher for the broadcasters at general elections for many years now, is to take the average of the votes per candidate in each ward. That amounts to the sum of the average votes per party per ward across the seat, which was precisely the label applied to the exercise in the leaflet. I hope that helps.
Evan has brought receipts. So they sent me a complete breakdown they did looking at the data from those local elections. You can see here are the different regions, and then they've taken the average. And the reason it's 13% is that's the amount of that region which overlaps with the region which is the constituency in the general election. It's not an exact match, but if you put together all of these and some fractional ones of them, that gives you the entire constituency. And Evan's then gone through and shown. So for example here, this is the Conservative column. There's a Lib Dem column, and you can see down here the Conservatives ran 2 candidates. That's how many votes they got. You average them, there's their average. Lib Dems had 2, then you get the average. So it's a way of compensating for the fact that you've got uneven numbers of candidates per area and you're voting in different numbers of people. So there you are. To recap that, they averaged each of the people running for the same party in the same ward, weighted that for the overlap of the ward with the constituency, and then they would sum up all of those average votes per party per ward, which does make sense, but I will admit it's not immediately obvious what they meant. And one final thing. After the election was over, I then did take the actual results that happened and compare them to the flyer that Dave Rowntree didn't like to see how accurate what the Lib Dems were saying ended up being. And they did get the top 2 parties correct. As you know, I'm not against going back and looking at how well we did with predictions, how accurate we were, and discussing when we get things right or wrong. And in that vein, Evan Harris did have some concerns with Dave Rowntree's flyer. So I guess, all flyers are open to discussion now. And I thought, even though Dave is a friend of mine, we should make sure we hear out Evan. And Evan also has some very good insights into this general question of how do we find data we can trust? And how do we analyze what we know before an election to have some kind of independent and honest, trustworthy predictions for what is likely to happen? To recap, we can look at previous results, both previous general elections and local council elections, and we can look at polls that are done within a constituency. But there is a new player in town, the MRP poll. That's a multi-regression post-stratification poll. And if you're wondering what that means,
put simply, they are large national polls of around 20 to 30,000 people. When you get all that data, what these polling companies do is project the national vote share and the vote share for each demographic factor against the known demography from the census, from the annual census of the constituency. So you apply the national figures with a big sample on demography to the demographics of the constituency. 10 to 12 different polling companies did these MRP polls. Now, there's a rule in the proper use of statistics, which I know you're aware of, which is you don't cherry pick. You mustn't cherry pick a single national poll and say, hey, I'm ahead. You mustn't cherry pick a single MRP poll, especially when they all have different methodologies, different assumptions, and say, well, look at this one, I'm ahead. That would be wrong. The website that you praised in your last election video, which was called This Vote Counts, that used a median, not a mean, of 5 MRP polls. Again, a reasonable approach to take. Now, what Dave Rowntree said when he said the polls show him ahead was he was taking one MRP poll done by Survation and recommended by a tactical voting website called Best for Britain, which was a commercial partner of Survation, and only used that single poll. And that's why he was wrong, because that poll was wrong. He was misled. That's why it was not appropriate for that to be the basis of a bar chart in his leaflets. And you might say didn't put him in a good position to criticize his opponents for using a well-trodden and respected path of showing what the scores on the doors were in the horse race, which is aggregating, summing the average votes per candidate, per party in a ward. So I think there's lessons for everyone here.
So there you are. That's what MRP polling is, and thank you so much to Evan Harris for taking the time out to analyze data, record the videos, and help me out with putting this video together. And that's it, I'm done. Hopefully please be the last video in my series on this election. And thanks to all MPs, ex and candidate who helped out. From the Lib Dems, we had Evan Harris this time. Previously from Labour, we've had Tom Wilson and Dave Rowntree. And of course, from the Count Binface party, we have had Count Binface themselves. That's it. It's the end of the video. It's the end of the series. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
East Renfrewshire.